Every single website I read, I have no idea what any of these companies do. I can't wait till I learn enough that I'll actually get it. They're just not actually saying anything. No one is explaining what they're doing. People think the homepage should be everything to everyone. And then we always ask, like, how many people do you have on your team? They're like, well, it's just me and my 3 other co-founders. I'm like, how are you testing across all these things? They're like,
welcome to the Growth by Creativity podcast, where we discuss the art of captivating storytelling, compelling design, and imaginative communication strategies through interviews and case studies with creative experts. Hope you enjoy and subscribe.
Today, I'm joined by Anthony Pieri, co-founder of Fledge PMM, a product marketing consultancy that helps early-stage B2B startups sharpen their positioning, better articulate their value propositions, and translate those outputs into a rewritten homepage. Since Fledge started, Anthony and his partner, Rob Kaminsky, have worked with over 100 venture-backed startups. Anthony, welcome to the show.
glad to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
So, Anthony, in terms of your sort of sweet spot, can you tell us a little bit more about what your agency does?
Yeah, absolutely. So we work with a lot of early stage startups, usually SaaS, usually B2B. And a lot of them are horizontal in nature, which is not a super well-known term, as we've realized, unless you are a horizontal company. A lot of times you've run into this, but it's companies that can have a product that works across many different industries versus a vertical startup would be like, we've made this software for the construction industry or for, financial services. Horizontal are more use case based, where you think of an app like Calendly, which is how I think we maybe even booked this call, is through a Calendly link, which is like anyone in any industry who's trying to book meetings online could use Calendly. So anytime we run into these horizontal companies that service multiple industries for different reasons, what ends up happening is they're really hard to explain. They're hard to message across so many different contexts at once. And so what ends up happening is when they try to write their homepage, maybe they raise money, whatever the impetus is, that's like, we really need to sharpen what we're saying on there. Everyone gets stuck. And they basically realize, how do we speak across all of our different target segments? Which features should we highlight? Which ones should we de-emphasize? Maybe they're in a newer product category that isn't very well known, or maybe they're mixing different categories together. Should they go the category creation route? Should they try to say they're a subcategory? All these types of questions bubbling around make it really, really hard to just rewrite what should be a simple exercise of rewriting the homepage. Becomes this giant monolithic question about the company's strategy and who they're positioned for. And so it's extremely stressful. And what we've realized is that this is not a copywriting challenge. It's primarily a product marketing challenge. Startups in general, in the early days, they don't hire product marketers very early. It's usually like once you're post product market fit, you're launching new features and you need a way to like let all of your thousands or tens of thousands of customers know about features, you bring on your first product marketer. But in the early days, all those product marketing skills, positioning, messaging, value proposition creation, all that type of stuff is usually absent from the founding teams. And so when people try to do this stuff on their own, it gets really, really difficult, really stressful, as I was saying. And so what we do is we say, we'll come in and basically help you figure out the way to make your positioning as clear as possible and help you surface the right features, the right product capabilities, de-emphasize the stuff that needs to be de-emphasized or can be explained later, could leave you with a really, really clear homepage. And so when prospects land on it, they get it immediately. Because honestly, I came into the whole B2B software world really late in life. I had a career in doing a lot of different things before that. When I came in, I was like, man, every single website I read, I have no idea what any of these companies do. I can't wait till I learn enough that I'll actually get it and I'll be able to read a website and get it. And then here I am way later and I'm like, oh wait, they're just not actually saying anything. No one is explaining what they're doing. And it's this giant pervasive problem. And so my partner and I, we actually ditched every other service that we offer. And we just do this one service because the demand is so big. The problem is so hairy and common that we're like, the whole business could just operate around solving this one specific problem. And so that's basically what we've been doing for the last couple of years now. And yeah, it's been going well so far.
That's amazing. And yes, I can 100% relate to this. We work with a lot of folks that don't have clear messaging and, we step in and also help. But in terms of the framework, do you have like a specific framework in terms of how you tackle these understandable websites, so to speak, and sort of transition them into something that people actually want to buy?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been developing this process through a lot of first principles thinking and then a lot of on the ground actual application. Like we're very much treating it like it's a scientific, hypothesis where we say we think it's going to be this way and then we try it one way and evidence proves it wrong or whatever. And so we've been iterating on this framework with tons and tons of startups, across all sorts of different industries, trying to make it as robust as possible. But like at a very high level, essentially solving this problem is usually actually just taking a couple key mindset shifts and changing the way that you think about what is a homepage for. And once you shift a couple of these mindsets, it becomes way easier to write. So like for one of them, one of the main things that we say is people think the homepage should be everything to everyone. It should be your investor deck for potential investors. It should be your recruiting, platform that gets people to want to work for you, tell about who you're for, your mission, your vision, all that type of stuff. And then also it's for every single segment to figure out every single thing you can possibly do. And so when you take it that way, it's like, oh man, how are we going to appease all these different groups have such different needs and things they're looking for? And that's why you end up with this super vague messaging, because it's like trying to write a letter to 25 different people, your mom, your grandma, your girlfriend, all at once. It's not going to work. And so what we say is the homepage for most people, especially in an early stage, it's actually like your primary marketing asset. It's the salesperson that never sleeps. They're always on call trying to sell the vision. And so when you treat it as a marketing asset and it's like the prime real estate for people to see, you have two options. You can say, I want to try to explain at a really poor level what we do to all of our segments. And our take is when you do that, none of them are going to get it. Or I'm going to try to pick maybe one or two segments that we would really like to get a lot more of in the next 6 to 12 months. And I'm going to write the page for them. And what ends up happening is that when you choose an audience, the other segments, because the messaging becomes so much clearer, they can actually see how they would use you, even if they're not in that target segment. So perfect example, we write on our homepage, we try to practice what we preach. So our homepage is incredibly specific about who we serve and the problem we solve. And we're for horizontal B2B SaaS companies, early stage, founder, head of marketing. And we list all these things out. We get people on sales calls every day, B2C companies, nonprofits, government agency. We get people coming in from all different angles. And they say, I know I'm not quite your ideal customer, but I understand what you're doing. And I would love for you to do that for us. That's something we need. So it's this weird flip side of where when you choose an audience and you make the message specific for them, the clarity that's unlocked makes it so all of your target segments get what you do and they can actually see themselves in the story. So that's the choice is going specific or staying broad and having nobody get it. So like, honestly, most of the work we do in the front half of our projects with these companies is around choosing that segment, figuring out if we want to do a horizontal slice, a vertical slice, and working through a lot of those things. And then if we have that person in front of us, what is that person trying to do? And then what would we tell them, like in an elevator? What would be the things that we would bring up if they're struggling with this problem? What aspects of our product would be most interesting to them? And it's really those two pieces where you find clarity of getting clarity on the market side and then clarity on the product side. And I like take an example of the design program Figma. If I was going to try to sell a product designer in Figma, I would talk about very different features than if I was talking to a product manager or if I was talking to a developer, because all three of those groups use Figma, but which features you talk about just vastly varies depending on which segment it is. So it all starts with the who, getting specific on that, and then really trying to bubble up what's the most interesting things about what we do for that specific person in their specific context.
Yeah, and that for sure makes sense. I'm curious, because you work with a lot of startups, you don't really have data, so to speak, on, who could potentially be a good, ICP, a good target market, right? So like, how do you determine in the very beginning who to tailor that messaging to? Like, do you go through a special exercise to figure that out?
Yeah, so we're a little old school in the sense that we still are believers in the lean startup methodology, which has fallen out of favor, and everyone is done with the MVP of the minimum viable product, build something small, test the market. Everyone kind of forgot that and they're all done with that. Now it's let's build the maximum, biggest, most complicated, expensive platform for as many people as possible. And so we're back in that era, which was pre-lean startup. We had some of the world's greatest companies came out of lean startup, and then everyone forgot it, and now we're here. So when we come with people, we're like making this choice about who you're going to go after. It's not a multi-year commitment. This is maybe a 3-month commitment, especially if you're really early stage. Where have you found some signals? And so for us, trying to see if you have fit with 10 segments at once, when you have one marketer, maybe one salesperson, you're not going to be able to get traction in any of the 10. So you're never going to even find out if any of them are actually a good fit. We go more lean startup, which is position for one, focus on them for maybe a couple months, and then do you have to pivot? Either it's going to be working, the positioning is right, they're coming along, or wasn't quite the right target segment. Let's point our angle at maybe the second best one that we think, because that is usually what we see people doing with tiny go-to-market teams, really trying to say, well, we're testing our product across these 10 different channels, 10 different market segments. And then we always ask, like, how many people do you have on your team? They're like, well, it's just me and my 3 other co-founders. I'm like, how are you testing across all these things? They're like, well, I sent out 50 cold emails to this segment on Monday, and I called some people in this, and I'm like, that is not testing it. Like, and we know firsthand, getting one channel to work with one segment took us, a year of dedicated 2 people's full-time energy and focus. So it's more choose what you think, like what you're finding. It's not going to be quantitative data, like you're saying, right? Pre-product market fit, you don't have the data. You're going more on qualitative. Which sales calls feel like we're the best? Which of the few customers you do have, who really likes it? Why do they like it? Doing the customer research, that type of stuff. And then using those as inputs to make your, what we would call your positioning hypothesis. Or we've even tried to steal some lean methodology, like a language, and called it the minimum viable positioning. Like, what's the smallest amount that you could do to just test, is this group right for us? And then pivoting to someone else, testing that group.
What happens after that 3-month period? Let's say it is a good fit. Do you just double down on that vertical, or do you keep doing what you're doing and then test another vertical in tandem? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
So it all depends on your go-to-market muscle, like what you're able to do. So a lot of horizontal companies will look at the famous ones that spread like wildfire, like Slack and Loom. They were just bought by Atlassian for like $1 billion. Calendly is another great example. And so they'll look at those examples and they'll be like, well, they didn't pick a vertical. They went after multiple. They had like a horizontal slice that crossed all these ones. But what a lot of times is these companies that we talk to that want to emulate those like targeting segment strategies, they won't have that virality built into it. So something like Loom, you send a video talking through it. So like if we meet with people with sales, we'll send them a Loom video basically saying, here's our process. And that person not in our company gets exposed to Loom. And then they're like, this is a cool tool. Maybe we'll try that. So the virality and the go-to-market, the distribution is built into the product. But if you take that away and you say, well, how am I going to acquire customers? If the answers are traditional marketing and sales, you are much better suited by saying, let's just keep diving in to this one segment until we've really penetrated it, and then use the success in that segment to expand. Like they call it the bowling pin strategy or the beachhead strategy, where you go after the initial bowling pin that is a segment that's maybe underserved by a large competitor who's kind of annoyed with the status quo. You really penetrate them, and maybe that gets you to, $1 million, $5 million, $10 million ARR with one group. And what does 10 million ARR do? It lets you hire more go-to-market people, more sales, more marketing, and now you can start layering on other segments and say, okay, well, if we were in, this small slice of healthcare, maybe now we can advance to, this part of healthcare, and we can go broader. And so we see like the most successful companies usually follow that pattern. They choose a small market, and then it keeps expanding with the success of the previous one at an exponential rate. Like even something like Facebook, right? Harvard was their initial market. Harvard's not big. It's not $1 billion, total addressable market of Harvard students, right? So we're talking 20,000 people total. They start with Harvard, then they go elite colleges, then they go all colleges, then high schoolers were invited, and then anyone in America, and then eventually anyone in the world. So gradually getting wider and wider and wider until now they have, 3 billion or something users. They're like a small country or whatever, or maybe a big country actually at that point. So that's kind of how we approach that.
In terms of when we talk about messaging, positioning, and then storytelling, do you see a thread? Because I feel like sometimes these words are used interchangeably sometimes, if that makes sense. What are your thoughts on storytelling, messaging, positioning? What is the common sort of aspect, and what are sort of the differences, and how you weave the different things together?
Yeah, great question. So our simplest definition of positioning is customer segmentation plus product differentiation. So it's a who, the market side, attached to your product and what makes it different from what they're used to. And what they're used to could be either a competitor, like an actual tool, or it could be like just a way of doing things, a process or whatever. When you combine those two things, a specific group of people and your product differentiation for that group, that gives you positioning. Messaging is going to say, all right, well, if we were going to get in front of them, what would be the key messages we would want to get across? We would want to talk about how we solve this problem with these specific features or something like that. The storytelling angle is, okay, how would we arrange those messages into a narrative that makes sense? And there's lots of different ways that you can structure these narratives. Like we've worked with a couple companies that are much larger and multi-product. So just to give you an example, kind of a silly example, the storytelling aspect would be like, if I'm selling a kit to repair a hole in drywall, right? So there's probably 6 or 7 products represented in that kit. You have the metals, and this is showing my very small understanding of home improvement projects, but you got the spackle or whatever stuff that goes in the wall. You've got like the metal scraper thing. You've got the paint, all these different stuff. The storytelling of that value proposition, you could do it in two different ways. You could explain each individual product, right? Here's why this spackle is the best spackle of all. Here's why this paint, or you could arrange those into one thematic, like here's how we from end to end are going to help you repair the hole in your drywall. And we're going to talk about all the products in both examples, but they're just two different narrative structures, right? Talking about individual or talking about them in one way versus a company like Microsoft Office, which has sheets, spreadsheets and document creation. It makes less sense for them to try to use a narrative flow that's like, here's how we solve your productivity. And sometimes you'll see that on these pages. We're going to transform your operation. And it's like, I don't even know what that means. Where their narrative might be better to literally just say, we're the best in class document creator, right? Microsoft Excel is the number one, and just basically talk through the different products and show how they're each unique. So that's how I would see the three kind of going together, from the positioning, messaging, all the way down to the storytelling angle.
It's funny that you mentioned Microsoft, because I just saw the new Copilot video, and it was somewhat, I don't know if you've seen it, but
I have not yet, no, but they're doing cool stuff over there.
Yeah, so it's a little bit on that sort of productivity front.
Yeah.
Your assistant front, all of that language.
Absolutely.
Curious to hear your thoughts once you see it. I think a big challenge, as silly as it may sound, is how to explain your startup or your software company, right, in one sentence. I saw that you wrote an article about this on LinkedIn. Do you want to, walk our audience through how you go about sort of explaining what you do in one sentence?
Yeah, for sure. So it all comes down to, what are you positioning against? It's the positioning, we see it as, where do you live in the customer's mind, right? And we didn't come up with that. Like that, the main positioning book was written in like the 70s or something. Like, people have been saying this for a long time. And you're basically saying, when I'm bringing something new to the table, I need to give a reference point for someone to say, I get what it is. So the silly example, but actually I think it's not that bad, is like, there used to be the joke where like every startup we'd say, we're the Uber for dog walking, or we're the Uber for blank. And what they're doing is they're using reference points to explain the concept. So for us, it's like, you can do this at the product category level. Like Notion's a great example. So Notion is an interesting new type of thing that doesn't really fit in any of the categories. So how would you explain Notion, right? And you could say, well, it's, sort of like Microsoft Word and Google Docs kind of, but what they do on their homepage, and this is literally in the headline on their homepage, they say your wiki, docs, and projects together. That's literally their H1 on the homepage. And all they're really doing is saying, it's this product category plus this product category plus this product category. And that gives you enough to be like, interesting. I have a loose understanding of what I would expect to find if I opened up Notion. And that touch point will let me discover more. Sometimes, though, the sentence is less around product categories, combining them, and more like where you fit into the workflow, right? Like with Loom, we're the easiest way to send, this is what they used to have, was they would say, their H1, H2 was, I think it was Loom on, meetings off. And it was like, skip the boring update meeting and send a quick update video with Loom or something like that. And so what they were doing is basically situating this product inside of a traditional workflow. I'm trying to update my team. Normally I do it with meetings. Don't do it with meetings anymore. Everyone hates meetings. Let's send this video instead. And it cuts down your amount of time in meetings. They had like some exact stat. It was like 29%. I can't remember. But I think it's usually, when you're trying to simplify it, it really just all comes down to choosing that reference point. Is it going to be another type of competitor, a collection of product categories, or is it going to be more on like, where do I fit in someone's life?
Yeah, and that makes sense. In terms of, I know we touched on this briefly before, but why is positioning so important?
Yeah, I think it's really the basis of your entire business strategy. It's like the question of, where are we going to play? Why do we think we're going to win? Why would the people in that group want to use us? And we've seen this proliferation of companies that are raising money, and they have to convince investors that they're going to be $1 billion company. And ironically, what they always miss is all the $1 billion companies started with a very tight positioning for one group of people, right? Like, it is so rare that the companies, unless they have these insane virality mechanisms in them, it's almost always we started with one group. Even Amazon, right? Amazon, massively big company. What did they start with? They started with books online, people just trying to buy books. One very specific thing. So for us, positioning is so important because it's like the guiding strategy that prevents you from getting pulled into 1,000 directions. And mostly we talk about it on the marketing and sales side, but the product design side, like the actual product management, product roadmap is so impacted by who you're building for. What features you decide to build and what you put in the platform are ultimately decided by which customer segment did you pick. And when we see weak positioning, what ends up happening is you'll say, we just landed a healthcare client. We just landed a fintech client. We landed a logistics. Well, the logistics people want these 5 features because it's going to help them with their workflow. But the financial services people, they want this. And so after not much time, you've created this giant monstrosity on the product side, but then it becomes impossible to market, impossible to message, because then now your hands are tied and you say, well, how would I explain this on the homepage? And it's so confusing because you're like, logistics have such different needs than fintech, and I want them all to be in there. And that's how you end up with these, horrible taglines and horrible phrases that are trying to appeal across such different groups. It's the result of the opposite of positioning. The refusal to position ends up with broad messaging, extremely inefficient go-to-market, really bad product experience, like bloated, overbuilt, all that type of stuff. So for us, it's really like the choice to be, are we going to be for one group to get our initial success? Or do we try to go from 0 to 1 billion in one jump, not realizing that everyone does these, they don't go from 0 to 1 billion, 0 to a unicorn, unless you're OpenAI. And they didn't even really, they had decades of development and research and stuff. And they were able to go really big, really fast. But you're not OpenAI, they're a once in a generation company. And so the rest of us mere mortals have to think about it a little smarter and just, try to use something that's more based in reality.
So Anthony, just in terms of like going back to that blueprint high level, would you say that the sort of big steps are, who you want to test, right? You have like a test segment, then do your positioning statement so you're really clear and the team is clear. Then draft the messaging, potentially weave in some stories depending on, the use case, and then deploy all of that onto the homepage and possibly other marketing and sales collateral. Is that on a high level sort of your workflow?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like the process. We handle parts of that, right? Like we help them get the win on the homepage, but we don't actually do the translation to sales decks and marketing materials. But that is exactly what we tell them to do. It's funny, like we've spent a couple years now just trying to get homepages down. And so like when we see very all-purpose, sometimes agencies that are like, we do everything you could possibly imagine. And we're like, we've spent 2 years just trying to figure out how to write a homepage, and we learn new stuff every day. It'll be like, oh yeah, we'll also write your LinkedIn, and we're going to, send your cold emails, and we're going to do your SEO and stuff. I'm like, it's less believable to me that someone could truly be an expert in every single domain, right? So we say, we'll help you do it on the homepage, and hopefully you have some people on your team who can help with the other translations.
Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. Like, does the messaging vary depending on the platform?
Yeah, great question. It really is just the messaging doesn't vary, but the presentation of the messaging varies depending on the platform. So like even just to use an example, content is so specific to the channel. Like there's certain content that works really well on a channel, and there's certain content that doesn't. So like LinkedIn, we have not been able to successfully get videos having a lot of traction. We've seen some people do it, but a lot of times they're like video first creators. So they really only do videos and have grown an audience. For us, what we found that worked really well on LinkedIn was really detailed graphics and diagrams explaining our process with long write-ups. So that like works really well. But if I'm going to say those same messages to try to get people using something like TikTok, it's going to have to look different. Different channel, different distribution. And so we're going to explain it in a different way. And then not even that, but then you take into account of all the stuff about funnels and awareness stages. And are we trying to educate people who aren't even familiar with the problem? It gets adjusted. So it's like the core positioning and messaging doesn't change. But depending on the channel that you're displaying it, you're going to use different tools and tactics to get those messages fleshed out for the specific audiences. So like I'm not a big proponent in content repurposing for that main reason. I know some people are, even my partner, Robert, he's always like, I think we should be chopping up our videos and posting. I'm like, I never see the great creators being like if I was going to make a TikTok and I was like, I want to make the best TikTok possible, the last thing I do would be like, let me record a webinar for 1 hour and then find a clip in it. And that's going to be the best way to get a good TikTok. I'd just be like, what's the way to make a good TikTok? So I don't know, maybe that's a tangent, but that's how we think about that.
Yeah, I think TikTok is a beast in itself. I would say, I think the way you edit the video plays an important role. So
for sure,
if you were to repurpose a webinar, like the pace would change and you do like quick cut and all of that. And obviously keep it, less than 10, 20 seconds. But for sure, I see your point. In some instances, it's not possible.
And again, my partner, he's a big repurposing. He loves Gary Vee. He's like, I love how you can get everything everywhere. And So we even have big disagreements on that. And this is more of a personal, thing that I think about it. But no, I'm not the voice of reason in this. Like we always say, our expertise is very narrow. And when we go outside our expertise, we're just shooting from the hip at that point. So take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt.
Anthony, in terms of a success story with a client of yours, does something come to mind? Like something where they partnered with you and then this massive transformation happened?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen a lot of success stories in the sense it's usually along the lines of they come in, they have a really confusing homepage, and they're really not quite sure how to get it clear. And so helping them find that angle. I was just chatting with actually a previous founder who works in an HR tech software, basically. And they came in and it was a very, very competitive marketplace where all these tools kind of looked exactly the same. And so we helped them find like a pretty unique positioning and way to message it. And so after they ran through our process, like not only did they feel super jazzed about it because they felt like it was actually really unveiling all of the main things that they felt about their company that wasn't coming across in their old messaging, but they were able to get that up on the homepage. And then, they reported back big conversion rate jumps and people was helping with their sales cycle and all those types of things. So if you have like your product strategy and your go-to-market strategy pointed in loosely the right direction, clarifying the messaging can just be this massive accelerant, like making everything work better. But it's funny too, like we'll have a lot of companies that we work with and they'll realize like after we work with them, we may actually lower their conversion rate because they were getting a ton of people who were like, what is this thing? And they just get in the product to figure it out. And then they might have converted, but they churn immediately, right? They get in the product and they're like, oh, I thought this was something else. And they churn. So it's like, you have to think about these things at a system level, right? Like even an increase in conversion isn't always a good thing if you're sending the wrong people there because they're just going to churn and vice versa, right? Sometimes the lowering of a conversion rate can be the sense of like, all right, we need to actually adjust our go-to-market because we're sending bad fit customers. Now that we clarify the messaging, they're not converting anymore because they're like, oh, this wasn't actually for me, which is what you want. You don't want them to get in your product and muddy up all the data and everything like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. Anthony, if folks want to learn more about you and your company, where should they go?
Yeah, our website is a great starting point if you were interested in our actual consulting services. So it's fletchpmm.com. But if you just want to hear more what we think about messaging, getting helpful tips and stuff, our LinkedIn profiles are definitely the best place. So it's Anthony Pieri. You could just search me on there. Shoot me a connect request. I accept pretty much everyone. And yeah, we post like every day. We'll try to do something helpful. And, we don't really ask anything in return. And LinkedIn helps us by promoting it with the algorithm and hopefully finding the right people. So yeah, we give a lot away for free by design.
Anthony, thank you so much.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.